Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the September 27th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with Community Charter Council Procedure Bylaw 2018 number 7272 and Ministerial Order number M192 governing open meetings. As the province has moved into phase 3 of the reopening plan, question period has been reinstated for those in attendance for agenda items only. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. At the start of question period, the chair will call those who have signed up to the podium to address council. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was just about to say let's pause until we achieve quorum, but Councillor Gesselbrock is here now. So the one late item today, Madam Chair, is the addition of Governance and Priorities Committee matrix, which has been added to the addendum.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. I would look for a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended, moved by Mayor Krogh, seconded by Councillor Martman. Everyone in favor? Great. Motion for the adoption of the minutes as circulated. Mayor Krogh, seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any revisions? We're good. Thank you. Agenda planning. Ms. Gurry, introduced by you.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. So this is the agenda planning portion of your agenda for the Governance and Priorities Committee. On pages 8 through 11 of your regular agenda is some of the agenda planning documents, as well as I noted under the late items, the matrix has been added to the addendum. So there is a list of upcoming meetings planned for subjects for meetings planned for the remaining 4 Governance and Priorities Committee meetings that we have after today. So a couple of them are outlined on page 8 of the agenda, the upcoming agenda for October 25th and November 8th. Those are subject to change based on staff having everything prepared, so they could be switched around. And then in more detail on the matrix that is outlined in the addendum. So if council or the committee has anything to add to the matrix or any questions about the matrix or any suggestions about the agenda planning, I would offer this is the time.
Any questions, comments? I have a question, Ms. Gurry. In the matrix, I find the timeline a little difficult to follow, and I wonder if it's being updated. And I'll give you an example. So we have a crosswalk safety topic in progress slated for May. And is that May 2022? And the referrals to references to quarters are 2021? Okay.
So thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, the date on the left-hand column was the original date it came. So the first item of crosswalk safety did come to you in May. Mr. Sims and his team are bringing a variety or more than the one-time topic, which is why it says in progress and not complete. And yes, the Q3, Q4 where noted is just because there wasn't an exact date for 2021 specified, but it would be in that range of time. So all of the dates on the left are for 2021, and the ones that are saying in progress that was the original date of the first topic was introduced, and then as we add it again, I'll add it down the list with the appropriate date, GPC date. If there's a way I can make that more clear, I'll have a look and see if I can adjust that.
Okay, that explanation is great. Thank you. So moving on to reports. Thank you, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, if I may, to Ms. Gurry, I look forward to the next couple of GPC topics. And I'm not sure if this is appropriate or not, Ms. Gurry, but I wanted to bring it forward. I know that several councillors this past weekend were part of a online workshop regarding the Hub project, and several others of us attended on site on the Saturday. And I realize that we're in the process of gathering public opinion and feedback. But I'm wondering, before we go further down this path, if council doesn't need an opportunity to talk amongst ourselves about our vision for this piece of property and what we feel as a whole should be there. I'm just sensing that there is disparity in the views, and it makes it hard to answer questions from the public. So I put that out there, and I don't know how we might proceed. But I would appreciate a chance to talk with fellow councillors about our vision for that site.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Councillor Thorpe. I see Mr. Sims has arrived to answer some questions about perhaps the process or when council can have that discussion.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Certainly, we're in the information gathering stage at this point, and I think, as Councillor Thorpe notes, there's a fairly strong range of views. And I think our intention, and one of the things I took away from Saturday was we need to get this right. I think we were all on that page originally, but we need to be mindful of the time and not rush getting it right. So I think bringing it forward to the GPC or council is entirely appropriate. Our next steps would be to bring an information report on what we heard, to allow that to percolate for a little bit as well. So we're happy to take this at council's pleasure, whatever you wish.
Thank you. I appreciate that comment, Mr. Sims, and I think you're quite right. This is such an important piece of prime property downtown. We have to make sure that we get it right as much as possible. So I think further discussions will be very valuable. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you. I echo that, having received lots of letters and comments on that as well. The fact that there was only 3 options given, and going back to our original conversations, none of those reflected the conversations that council had at the time. So I would like to have a lot more work done on that and a lot more public input. Thank you.
Mr. Sims?
Thanks. Just that, I think there was perhaps a common misconception on the part of the public as well. That there was 3 options, pick one, and that's what we're going to start building next year. And it's always complex to try and have these discussions, but the intent really is those were put out as to foster conversation and discussion. It certainly has done that, but it's not to suggest that those are the final, pick a menu from these 3. It's just really about fostering the discussion. So we're certainly happy to hear, and maybe, Madam Chair, you'd like to add it to the list of topics on the GPC discussion, because that's another sort of open forum that the members of council can have strong input to. And our intent would be really to further develop ideas and what we've heard.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe, or actually Ms. Gurry, do you need a motion to that effect?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. A motion, actually, if Councillor Thorpe would like to add it as a future GPC topic. I just wanted first Mr. Sims to speak so I could find out how the process is going to work. But if he feels a GPC topic is the right way to go, then a motion would be appropriate, yes.
All right. Thank you. That was actually a holdover, but as I am the speaker, I will make a motion that we add the Downtown Hub project as a future topic for GPC discussion.
Seconded by Councillor Martman. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Councillor Martman?
Thank you. I just wanted to add to that. So thank you, Councillor Thorpe, for bringing it forward, because I'm sure all of us in council are hearing various things from the community. I'm just wondering, some of the feedback we've had was about, why don't you build something on it? Why isn't this something for the community? And my understanding was there could be real issues with doing other types of plans, such as building, et cetera. And I think we need to talk to the public about that. So I'm wondering what your feedback is on that.
Thanks, Councillor Martman. Madam Chair, just really, that was something that we heard quite a bit of, and I think that we've heard that from some of the professionals that we have engaged in the project as well, that it feels, and personally speaking, it's kind of anyways, that's me, but It feels like it wants to have some reflection of structure in that area. And, you know, some of the questions that you may wish to consider is how much more public space do we need in the downtown core and that sort of thing. So it's, you know, if there's structural elements, we don't have all the answers. You know, some people have said, oh, it can hold a building of 4 stories, and I don't believe we know any of that. From our experience in this building, we know that the subsoil is old tidal mudflat, and so not likely to be very strong. And anyways, that's all details in the end. We really just want to get the concept right before we start delving too deep into those. But I think more and more are saying it'd be good to have a building of some sort there. It's
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martman. On to reports. Ms. Gurry, political signage regulations.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Robertson here in a second. She's going to provide you with some political signage regulations, what we currently have in place, some solutions to hopefully simplify the process, and some options for you to consider should you wish. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Robertson.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Previously, the GPC conveyed that it wanted to discuss the topic of political signage at one of its meetings. And so I'm here today to introduce my report and walk the committee through the findings on how political signage is currently regulated and how the process might be streamlined going forward. And as part of that discussion, Council wanted a report prepared on what options might be available as it relates to restricting signage, locations, or limiting the number of signs per candidate. So today I'll provide an overview of how signage is currently regulated for public property, private property, as well as ministry highway rights-of-way. I'll also outline the conflicts that exist with the various bylaws that regulate political signage and convey the information associated with the implications for options that were explored, such as restricting political signage on public property, regulating the number of signs or regulating the locations, the time frame for placing signs, and the size of the political signs. And then at the end, I've provided some options for the committee to consider based on the findings. So currently, signage for public property is regulated through 3 bylaws. The first is the sign bylaw, and it states that signs cannot exceed 6.5 feet squared. Signs can only be placed 30 days before the election date. They must be removed no more than 7 days after the election, and they're also subject to the provisions of the Traffic and Highways bylaw. So when we move to the Traffic and Highways bylaw, Section 23 states that candidates must file a written undertaking and provide a $200 deposit, stating that they will remove their signage no later than 30 days after the election day. And the bylaw also states that no political signs can be placed on highway medians or affixed to utility poles or trees or obstruct the free passage or visibility of pedestrians or traffic. There is a third bylaw as well, which is the Parks, Recreation and Culture bylaw, and this comes into play when it comes to regulating signage in parks. And this includes areas such as playlots, playfields, trails, open spaces, and other areas possessed or operated by the city, which are reserved for parks and recreation purposes. And that bylaw also points back to the Traffic and Highways bylaw. So when it comes to regulating signage on private property, Section 6.6 of the sign bylaw states that signs must be removed 7 days after the election and conform with the Traffic and Highways bylaw. And the Traffic and Highways bylaw states that it must be removed within 30 days after. Then we have highway rights-of-way, and this is under the jurisdiction of the province. And these areas are governed under the provincial policy, and these rules state that political signs can only be placed during the campaign period. And so the campaign period is actually 28 days plus the day of the election for a total of 29 days. The signs also have to be removed the day after the election, and they cannot pose a traffic hazard, and therefore prohibited from being placed on bridges and overpasses, tunnels, and cannot be placed on Highway 19 from Duke Point Ferry Terminal to Trans-Canada Highway, and Highway 19 from the Nanaimo Parkway from Trans-Canada Highway to the Island Highway. The existing regulations conflict, as we've seen. There is no clear date as to when political signage can be placed on private property, but removals within 7 days. Political signs on public property must be removed in 30 days under the Traffic and Highways bylaw, but the sign bylaw states that it must be removed within 7. Then there's also the provincial rights-of-way, and so at a minimum, these discrepancies need to be addressed. So beyond fixing these regulations, we can then look to what options we would look for going forward. First off, local governments do have the ability to regulate signs on both public and private property, provided that freedom of expression rights are considered when it comes to limiting the number of signs or locations. Staff reviewed several other local government political sign bylaws and found that there were a variety of approaches taken. Some were very restrictive, where they prohibit all political signs on public property. And it should be noted that this ban does not extend to private property or provincial rights-of-way. Some are very permissive, such as the City of Nanaimo, where signs are allowed except where restricted for standard reasons, such as sightlines or for safety. And then there's others that take a compromised approach, where they either may regulate locations, they may regulate the number of signs per candidate, or both. And so I'll just take a few minutes to outline what those implications might be. So the first option that was explored consisted on full restriction on public property. And it's important to note that placement of election signs is protected by the right to freedom of expression under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And any restrictions on that freedom of expression must be a justified reason in order to be constitutional. And those justification type reasons would include safety concerns, environmental considerations, and operational costs resulting from extraordinary enforcement. As an example, a municipality that did implement full restrictions on public property is the City of Surrey. And the bar is very high for local governments when implementing restrictions on someone's freedom of expression. But Surrey was successful in demonstrating that for years they had ongoing enforcement issues that cost the City of Surrey a considerable amount of bylaw enforcement time, funds, and effort. And in fact, in the 2018 election, staff removed more than 1,800 illegally placed signs and spent over $160,000 to enforce the bylaw. In looking at whether this would be a viable option for the City of Nanaimo, I consulted with the manager of bylaw services, and he reviewed the complaints from the 30 days prior up through and including the 30 days after the election. And he noted that most complaints were really about sign blight, those that just don't like signage, but they did not pose a safety risk and they were in compliance. There was actually 4 that were logged in violation, but he noted that a quick call to the candidate's agent and they were removed very swiftly. The GM and Engineering of Public Works also indicated that their department received some complaints, but those were primarily related to the ministry rights-of-way. And again, a very quick phone call, and it was rectified. So given this information, it would be challenging to justify a complete restriction in Nanaimo. A compromised option related to limiting the number of signs or locations of public property. As with a full ban, the restrictions must also be justified. So the City of Quesnel and Terrace, for example, they were a couple of the municipalities that placed limits on the number of signs per candidate. The City of Prince George and Penticton, they've chosen the path of limiting the locations, given the enforcement concerns that they experienced. The City of Delta and Coquitlam, as examples, have limited the locations and the number of signs. So for example, with Delta, they have 18 specific locations, and each candidate is allowed to put 1 sign in each of those locations, as well as an elector organization sign. Now, I know Council was curious about whether signs could be limited for financial reasons, given that not all candidates can afford signage. But as the Local Election Campaign Finance Act already addresses funding laws on maximum donations, election expenses, and spending limits, affordability on its own may not be a constitutionally acceptable reason for limiting someone's freedom of expression. The one option that would be an acceptable reason for limiting signs would be for environmental reasons, particularly given the fact that environmental responsibility is one of the strategic themes identified in Council's strategic plan, and one of the key areas within that theme is to consider those when making decisions on impact and climate change. Limiting the number of signs would assist in limiting the number of plastic, wood, and construction material that would get recycled. It would also reduce the volume of signs that would need to be recycled or disposed of. And the spin-off effects would actually reduce campaign financing expenses. Looking at location limits has been problematic for some of the local governments who have implemented it. In speaking with fellow corporate officers from those municipalities, the problem arises when those areas become full. So it's on a first come, first served basis, and typically what happens is at 12:01 a.m., everybody is beelining to the locations. So they've referred to them a little bit like the sign games. One fellow took an interesting approach and challenged the bylaw by stating that he put his notices, election-type notices, on a bicycle, and was claiming that it really wasn't a sign because it wasn't put into the ground. Others would put them illegally placed on a Friday night, the minute that City Hall was closed, and put in a prohibited spot, perhaps at an overpass, and then by the time enforcement staff came back on Monday, there had already been a ton of exposure for that candidate, and then this cycle would repeat. The other thing that they said they've experienced more of was more cases of sign theft. And who knows who might be pulling someone's sign out and another one popping in, right? So those were just some of the challenges that they faced. This is just another picture of a photo of some of the discarded signs from 2018 in Surrey. So for Nanaimo, limiting the number of signs per candidate or locations would also be challenging, as sign limit regulations cannot be applied to provincial highway rights-of-way. And as noted, I had checked in with our manager of bylaw services, who's here today, and asked them to identify what the most popular locations were. And as you'll note on the slide, the most popular locations are actually within the highway rights-of-way, and when we would have no jurisdiction over those areas. Despite these challenges, ministry staff from the policy branch have conveyed their support should Nanaimo wish to pursue limiting the number of signs per candidate by including those highways within the list of prohibited locations. But it would be subject to approval from the Nanaimo ministry district staff, and as of this morning, I still hadn't heard any preliminary word as to whether or not they would be supportive of that. If they did provide their support, it would certainly make limiting the number of signs per candidate much more achievable. So also, if supported by the ministry, and should council wish to pursue limiting the number of signs, staff would envision utilizing the same process that the city of Quesnel uses, whereby each candidate would file an application with the corporate officer, as is done now. The only difference would be that each candidate would submit a list or map of where they had planned to place their signs. It would be vetted by engineering staff for approval, and by law enforcement staff would also be noted so that they were aware of where the signs are located throughout the city. It is important to note that it would not mean additional or provincial downloading of enforcement. It would still be up to the ministry, but bylaw staff has a very cooperative working relationship with the ministry, and has and would continue to assist with complaints through our permission agreement, and I attached a copy of what that looked like to my report. It would actually probably make enforcement easier. And the last option for consideration relates to the size of political signs. And currently our bylaw states that signs cannot exceed 6.5 feet squared without a permit. Other local government bylaws do allow larger signs without a permit. The city also doesn't regulate signage on private property, but it could if it wished to. So staff has not provided any recommendations regarding a change to the size of signs, as it does not appear to be an issue, but council if it wishes to make those changes, staff would be looking for a motion to provide some direction of what to include in the bylaw. So, the next few slides will deal with the specific staff recommendations, and for ease of consideration and debate, I've broken them down to 3, and I'm hoping to get direction on each one separately. But before we do that, I wanted to see if council has any questions or needed any clarification. And Mr. Sims, and I think Mr. Lindsay is here, and Mr. LaBerge are on hand in case there's any questions that fall within their jurisdiction.
Council? You're on. It doesn't, no, now you're off. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Robertson. You've obviously put a lot of work into this and a lot of thought, and I much appreciate it. I want to come back to my concern about this, and that is simply the potential use of what I see, based on, I am bragging here, considerable political experience in various elections over several decades. I'm concerned about us using a sledgehammer to swat a mosquito. So I want to come back to the issue of complaints and concerns. And my reading of the report and your comments this morning is, apart from the sign pollution complaints, we haven't had any significant number historically of complaints about placement and things of that nature. Fair?
No, Mr. LaBerge is nodding his head, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Martman?
Thank you. And thank you so much for all the work you've done on this. Part of the reason why I brought this forward, or my main concern, is actually the environment, which fits right into this. And there is another part, which is equity. And I see on election days that I think making it a more level playing field so that people don't have to compete by signs alone, which is really what we do. I think that limiting the number of signs perhaps, or the locations for the larger signs. We know that private property, you're free to go. But in reading this report, my thoughts led me to, of course, approving where they're allowed to be anyways, but perhaps limiting it to those locations. So we don't start having it willy-nilly all over the city. It's for environmental, it's for costs, and it's so that people don't have to spend an arm and a leg on signs. So, throwing it out there.
Thank you, Councillor Martman. Anyone else?
Through the chair, just in terms of locations, just wanted to clarify that even if you did, say, identify 10, for argument's sake, locations in the city, right now, that would not include the highway rights-of-way. So there would be those locations on private property or on public property, but also we have no jurisdiction over those rights-of-way.
Yep, go ahead.
And what I was meaning was only on the rights-of-way. No other signage except for private property, except for where they have the highway rights-of-way. And no other is what I'm thinking of restricting it to. And perhaps only one sign per candidate. So you can't have, for instance, when you go down to the end of Wakasaya and Bowen, if you're the one out there at 12:01, 30 days before, a lot of times you'll have one person put 5 signs down, right? And what I'm thinking is only one sign should be sufficient. And that's what I'm looking at restricting.
And I think that would, I believe that what you're saying would fall in line with the same approach that the city of Surrey took, where they banned all political signage on public property, but excluded the highway rights-of-way. But I don't believe that, given the lack of enforcement and costs from past problems, that it would stand up constitutionally to a challenge for limiting one's restriction of freedom. And so the bar is very high when you're wanting to do a full ban. And the reason why the city of Surrey was successful in doing it, and I believe they are the only one, is because they have, they were able to demonstrate in their staff report that they spent approximately $160,000. You could look at it for environmental reasons, but doing a full ban on public property would probably be challenging.
I don't want a full ban. I just want a ban on property other than the ministry rights of way.
That's what the city of Surrey has done. That's what's considered their full ban, because they only have jurisdiction on public property. You exclude the provincial, because it's not under the jurisdiction of the city. So it's almost like two separate jurisdictions.
I see Ms. Gurry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It's city property versus ministry property. So I think what you're speaking of is a full ban on city property, which then would go back to what Ms. Robertson was saying, is the only municipality in her research was the city of Surrey. And the reason they were successful is because they could prove or justify and that they spent $160,000 in bylaw enforcement and staff time, labor, et cetera. So a complete ban on city property, city public property, I think would have those charter arguments. I think that's what Ms. Robertson is trying to say.
That's correct.
If I may then.
Yep.
So the city of Penticton restricts signs on public property to 13 specific locations. Or the city of Delta, which is very similar in population, has 18 specified public property locations, and they limit it to one sign per individual candidate. So that was more the compromise that I was seeking.
I think, Ms. Robertson, could you go to this slide where you list the locations, the most popular locations? So here, Councillor Martman, on the right-hand side where it starts Mostar and Island Highway, those are the Ministry of Transportation rights of way. And then on the left are the most popular city public areas where signage is placed. So if you were looking to, per se, limit the locations to those locations, that wouldn't be a complete ban on city public property. But then you also would have to consider, I think Ms. Robertson, the staff that she was talking to referred to it as the sign games. So I think if you were going to go down any route, the easiest would probably to be limiting the number of signs and not the locations. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And then I think that limiting the number of signs would only, I think Ms. Robertson was trying to say, would only really be a measured option if the Ministry of Transportation staff was to respect the rights of ways, because otherwise, say we put a bylaw that just limited it to those left side locations and or limited 10 signs, we could only enforce 10 signs on that left-hand side, and they could put as many as they wanted on the right-hand side.
Okay, so thank you for that. I have Ms. Robertson who also wants to say something, and then I have two councillors. So Councillor Martman, are you good there?
Yeah.
Okay, and Ms. Robertson, you had a piece to add?
Sheila just captured it in the last sentence, which was all the ones on the right-hand side would still be excluded. You would only be able to have jurisdictional control over the ones on the left.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Thorpe.
Actually, I think Councillor Armstrong was first.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
Well, thank you. I understand what Councillor Martin's saying, but I think if it's not a big issue for our staff, I think it really is a non-issue. The only thing that I would say or add is that I could see the relevance of having that you can't have a sign, one of your own signs, let's say within 500 meters of each other. And then that would eliminate the fact of people coming in and putting 4 of their own signs in one corner, which then, takes up all the good spots. So, I mean, for me, I did only put up 4 signs total, and I don't think signs are as important as people think they are. But I don't think we should be wasting a lot of time on this if it's not a big issue, and I don't want to see us having to go to court. So if we could maybe look at that, the 500 meters, 700 meters, or a kilometer, whatever staff recommends. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm prepared to debate this, but I feel that we are debating something without a motion on the floor. And looking at the staff recommendations, I think most of our debate is going to be related to recommendation number 3. So if it's appropriate, I will move recommendation number 1, and perhaps we could deal with that first.
Seconded by Mayor Krogh. Now, I have a question. My recommendation has 4 bullets under it. So do you mean to move the first bullet, or the staff report actually references recommendations?
The option on the screen is the first recommendation, so I was hoping that we could deal with each one individually.
Okay.
And the first one is just to recommend that the draft amendments be made to the sign bylaw and the traffic and highways bylaw that would pull out the political signage provisions, and we would put them into one comprehensive political sign bylaw.
Okay.
And that's what I'm moving.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd certainly support this. I think this is what we should be doing as a minimum, and I'll have a lot more to say if we move beyond this first recommendation.
Thank you. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
The second recommendation is just looking to streamline the timeline that we have the placement of signs and the removal. And for simplicity's sake, staff are recommending that we try and mirror the ministry's policy so that it's easy. People have challenges with the different jurisdictions and which part is ours and which is the ministry. So we would be looking at having the committee endorse 30 days prior to the election or referendum, and that is already what we have for the most part. And looking to mirror their removal day where signs would need to be removed by the next working day following the electoral event. And I did want to just point out too that it would be for the general local election, it would be for federal elections and provincial elections, or for referendums, because provincial and federal signage placement would also fall to the local government bylaw.
Thank you. Do any council members want to move that recommendation?
I'll move it to get it on the floor.
And maybe Councillor Armstrong is moving it, or she has a question.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I'm going to say Councillor Thorpe moved that, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much. We have in this country and in this province, both at the provincial level and municipally, some very strict regulations around campaign donation limits, around all kinds of procedures related to election. And most campaigns are managed by and operated by and carried out by volunteers, etc. And I think just adding any further restrictions that might make it more difficult or open up opportunities, frankly, to prosecute, investigate, or require staff time to make sure something's happened, I just think is frankly unnecessary. I go back to my point earlier, which has been confirmed by Mr. Sims, that we really don't have issues in this community. The concerns around the placement of signage, and frankly, somewhat in response to what Councillor Martman said earlier, my view is that as much as it may be meritorious to consider reducing the number of signs overall from an environmental perspective, if the concern is that it also might unduly influence voting patterns to have a plethora of signs from one candidate and not from others, I come back to the campaign donation limits, campaign spending limits, all of those things. If you can't get enough people to sign your nomination paper or get enough people to make donations to your campaign to afford a decent sign campaign, as we say in the trade, then perhaps you should reconsider running for public office. And I say that with all due respect to everyone who in this wonderful society of ours can pursue public office. I just think we are moving to over-regulate a process which certainly in this community seems to have worked fairly well, which has produced a council, and I can say this because I've said it publicly before, which has produced, in my view, a pretty effective council. Authorize taking any steps beyond the first step we've taken in terms of recommendation number 1, I just think is not merited, won't improve the situation, and frankly won't be welcomed by the campaigns now that already have to, for practical purposes, struggle under a fair bit of I won't call it bureaucracy, but certainly regulation. I mean, after all, these are volunteer affairs by and large. You're not going to retain a lot of experts between elections who might remember all of the rules. The more rules you have, the more opportunity there is to breach them. And for what public purpose, what public benefit does the public receive? I just think that adding more burden is not merited. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Craig. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that this motion here, recommendation number 2, is simply streamlining the bylaws, because one says that the signs must be removed after 7 days, the other says 30 days, and then we have ministry, which is the day after. It is very challenging as election staff to administer that, so we were just looking to tighten that up so that we have consistent days. That's the intent of this one alone is.
So if I may, this is a housekeeping.
Correct.
As you're reviewing this. Okay, I have Councillor Thorpe and then Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I recognize this is to some extent housekeeping, and at first I was prepared to support this without too much consideration, but I'm now not so certain, and I'm looking at the last part of the recommendation, the removal by the next working day following the electoral event. To me, that just seems, in my opinion, a little bit too restrictive when we're dealing with volunteer workers who are perhaps having to work themselves at their day jobs. And I think in the past, whatever level of election we've had locally, the campaigns have been very responsible about getting signs down in a timely manner. We just saw that recently. And I heard 0 complaints about the signage issue. So I'm just thinking that the next working day, in other words, right after the election immediately, that just seems a little bit too restrictive to me.
Ms. Robertson?
And again, that was put forward simply because that's what the ministry's rules are. So anything that is in the ministry right-of-ways does have to come down the next day following. So we were simply looking to mirror ours with theirs because the majority of the signs are in those rights-of-way. Otherwise, you've got some that we're doing enforcement on perhaps 7 days or 30 days, and then others where it's the day after. So we were just looking to streamline that as well, but council certainly can select any day they choose for our bylaw.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you. Ms. Robertson has taken all my arguments. I'm quite in agreement with her. This is actually making it much more simpler. Because, I remember when I was election, I had mine down the next day. All this is saying, and I think most of mine were on the highway, but I didn't even know the highway had a rule that you had to take it down the next day. I was going based on what I was given when I went to City Hall and got my permit. So if this is all stated in the permit, here's the rules, and everybody has the same rules, and they all match up with the ministry's rules, then this makes sense. Just get everybody on the same page, basically.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Martman?
Thank you. And I'm not wanting to belabor this, but it does get confusing because traffic and highways bylaw says not more than 30 days, and political signs on provincial right-of-ways must be removed 1 day after the election, period. So,
And the sign bylaw says 7 days, through Madam Chair. So we're trying to fix that.
so that's what my understanding was that this was just to fall in line with the ministry's policy, so that we all whether we like it or not, that is the ministry's policy.
Mayor Krog?
Thank you very much, and I'm glad Councillor Martman emphasized this point, and my point, perhaps I haven't articulated very well, is the ministry guidelines apply to public Ministry of Transportation Highways rights-of-way. You are now placing, if you pass this, an extra burden on campaigns for other locations on what we'll call city property. And all I'm saying is it's tough enough now for campaigns to manage themselves, getting the signs down off Department of Highways rights of way. Now you're asking that apply to even more locations, making it even more difficult on local campaigns, which may be quite modest, both in terms of financing and availability of people to do the work.
Thank you, Mayor Krog. Ms.
Madam
Gurry?
Chair, I was just going, if I may.
Yep.
There's three options really with this. One has been presented, which is the 1 day. The second is 7 days. The third is 30 days, if you wanted to have consistency of things that we can control. So you could, for two of those three could be addressed if you went with a 30-day or a 7-day. At least you're collapsing some of this into it on our side of the ledger, and then that is an option that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Ms. Gurry?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was almost going to say just that. Currently, I just wanted to let you know for local elections, because of the discrepancies in the sign bylaw and the traffic and highways bylaw, we do allow for the 30 days. So currently, right now, when you come to get a sign permit for your political signs, we ask that they be removed within 30 days. So we've gone with the longer of the two that are outlined in our bylaws inconsistently. So as Mr. Rudolph said, right now there is a motion on the floor that does say the 1 day. There could be an amendment to make it the 7 or the 30, as Mr. Rudolph said.
Councillor.
Councillor Armstrong?
I thank you. I'm going to support this as written because I don't think it's onerous to do that. In the previous elections, when I've gone around, just about everybody's got their signs down the next day anyhow. So I think if we start having a whole bunch of different rules, it's harder to follow. And I'm in 100% support of the 1 day. It's just a matter of organizing your campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Yeah, I'm not really hard pressed either way. I think that it'll work out whatever the thing is. I mean, if we make it 7 days, it gives people a little bit longer, and then the ministry's got to do their enforcement to crack the whip and get the process started, and then everybody has to sit down in 7 days. But 6 in one, half a dozen the other, I think.
Thank you, and I will weigh in and say that I support this as is, merely because it seems very much to be a housekeeping amendment as this bylaw work is happening, and I actually think it's recommendation number 3 that's going to bring about a lot of debate. So all those in favor? We have Councillor Gesselbrock, Councillor Hemmens, and Councillor Armstrong, and Councillor Bonner. Opposed? Councillor Martman, Mayor Krog, and Councillor Thorpe. So that passes. Ms. Robertson, could you, just walk us through the third? Thank
So
you.
the third recommendation relates to whether council wishes to consider limiting the number of signs for environmental reasons. And should council wish to pursue this, staff would recommend that you move towards option 3A, and then also to provide the direction as to what the limit would be. Given we have no jurisdiction of provincial highway right-of-ways, staff also recommend and put in here that if this was selected, that it would be contingent on the ministry including the Māori highways within the list of prohibited locations within their policy. Otherwise, it could be really problematic to enforce. Should council wish to just retain the status quo of not limiting signs and keeping things as is, then recommendation 3B would be the one that you would move towards.
Any discussion, council? Would anyone like to move a recommendation? Oh, Councillor Armstrong? A or B?
Yeah, I would like to move recommendation B, please. Retain the status quo of not limiting the number of political signs per candidate.
Seconded by Mayor Krog. Any discussion? Councillor Thorpe.
That's all right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I was actually going to move the same recommendation, but I will speak to it briefly if I may. We've already had some discussion. I don't think we're facing a problem that we need to alter. And we're not Surrey. We don't have the problems that apparently they have. And I think there's to me a real constitutional difficulty in attempting to limit political signage for candidates. I don't see it as something that will help level the playing field. In fact, I think it would have the opposite effect for new candidates who don't have their names as readily known to the public as perhaps incumbents. There are spending limitations for campaigns. Are we going to limit the number of rack cards that candidates can distribute? Are we going to limit the social media campaigning that candidates do? Probably not. It's impossible. So I don't see us limiting the number of political signs. If candidates wish to spend their money on signage and it's within the agreed upon limitations of where those signs can be and when, then fine, let them go for it. So I just don't see any reason to challenge the status quo on this at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Councillor Gesselbrock?
Thank you, Chair. I think the main motivation behind this was the environmental considerations, and you know, it takes wood, which is a resource, to put up the signs, and then also the majority is made out of chloroplast. The wood can be recycled and reused pretty readily if the candidates take the time to pull out the screws and stack it. I've seen some that just collapse it all down and throw it into the landfill, which is a waste. And I think that's something that, one, we don't want to be promoting that and enabling that. And I think that some regulation around what is done with the signs should be considered. The second component's chloroplast, and there was a collection for it. The NRE did take it, and there was a broker for chloroplast, but unfortunately, there's not a big market in it, and with the private recyclers that the service is provided now, chloroplast is no longer readily recycled. So I think, yeah, if we're going to demonstrate at a political level that we're seriously consider circular economy and zero waste, I think that something needs to be done here. And one way is to limit the number of signs, which in the vacuum of regulation around reusing the wood, or on the type of materials used, or with the city making sure that there is provision for the service of recycling chloroplast, maybe that's the way to go. I think that there's some issues with that. I mean, it'd make cleanup really quick, you know, and make sure everybody makes that one-day turnaround if we only let people have 4 signs. But I think that there is some consideration about just the demonstration of a candidate's capacity to, you know, put a decent sign together that looks good and get their name out and coordinate putting it up there, that I think there is some merit in the political process for that. I would be supportive of limiting the number of signs. If we want to do 10, 20, I'm not sure exactly. I think there's different considerations around municipal election, provincial and federal, which should be considered. And I think this covers all of the different levels of government, this bylaw. But I don't think that we've really found a solution to the environmental impacts, which I think really do need to be seriously considered, especially just a matter of walking our walk and taking an opportunity in a very public way to say, you know, what principles we stand behind. So I don't know if there is any other options, and I'll put that out to staff. You know, can we put a regulation on requirement for reuse of the sign material, or restrictions on the type of material that can be used, or provide a service at the end of it that we'd take the time to, you know, once you're done the election and you want to get rid of your chloroplast, that we'd collect it and somebody would take the time, one of our staff, to find a broker to get it picked up and shipped off to Vancouver in a one-time thing. I'm not too sure, but I just put that out there. If staff have any thoughts, thanks.
That may be something that Mr. Sims might be able to respond
Ms.
to.
Gurry?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was just going to see if Mr. Sims could possibly have some answers to that. I'm really unsure about us being able to regulate what materials are used and/or the resources that would be involved for us to actually look after the recycling.
Madam Chair, I think to me that's a business that we don't currently do. So it's an added service that the city would need to choose to provide. And just the idea of finding the material broker that would handle specified or specific materials like that may be quite challenging. Yeah, we tend to pick it up and drop it off, and that's our role largely. Not the answer you want to hear.
Thank you. Just highlighting that a bit of a gap. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Martman and then Councillor Armstrong.
I think this is going to wrap up pretty soon. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for this work and for the conversations. And I think this is just the beginning, because perhaps this is something that at the provincial level should be more restricted when it comes to political signs for all elections. So I'm not going to give up on this, but I do want to say thank you because I know that work did go into it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Martman. Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what Councillor Martman said. And also, if we were to go down the road, it would, I believe it would require the Minister of Environment's blessing once again, is because environment is a provincial responsibility. So I think if we're going to do that and have a bylaw there, we'd have to go to the Minister before it could be done. Thank you.
Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much, Chair. If I may offer a comment, the reason we have the kinds of signs we do that are used by every political party and most candidates is because these things do have to endure through inclement weather for a requisite number of days. And that it is the solution that's been arrived at by what is a fairly significant industry every year or two or three or four or whatever, depending on where you're at. And as much as it would be nice to have a solution, my guess is that by the time you gathered them all up and shipped them to Vancouver, the carbon footprint of finding it is probably going to outweigh the benefit of the collection. So I'm happy to vote on the motion as it is, which is to retain the status quo.
Thank you, Mayor Krogh. And before I take the vote, I'll just echo that. This was clearly a lot of work on staff's part and gratitude for that. I think it's clear, though, I'm going to vote in favor of this, retaining the status quo. As Mayor Krogh said, we don't want to get into the business of over-regulating something that's already working fairly well. So thank you for your work. All
You're
those
welcome.
in favor? That is Councillor Martman, Mayor Krogh, Councillor Hemmens, Councillor Thorpe, Councillor Bonner, and Councillor Armstrong opposed. No. Oh, Councillor Gesselbrock opposed. Okay, thank you very much.
Just in terms of next steps, this will now go forward to the October 4th meeting under consent items. And once it makes its way through council, then staff will come back, me, with a bylaw that pulls all this stuff together that was decided today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, transitioning to Reimagine Nanaimo. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Council. I'm going to turn it over here momentarily to Ms. Bolt-Pulsing as she gets set up. She's going to run you through today, focusing on sort of an update, of course, of where we've been, our regular updates with you, but looking really, and I want you as a steering committee to have a good understanding of kind of next steps. And it's going to be a busy fall, including a couple of major dates where we're going to come back with the summaries of what we've heard in Phase 2 and then the launch of Phase 3, which is a big step in this process, is when we'd actually have a draft document. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bolt-Pulsing to kind of walk you through that.
Hello, Ms.
Good
Bolt-Pulsing.
Good afternoon, Council. So without further ado, this is an update on where we're at with Phase 2 of Reimagine. So we are, for the members of the public who are watching, we're in Phase 2. We've gone through Phase 1 and we're in the thick of Phase 2, having just closed our online survey on the 23rd, and I'll give some more details about the numbers of participation about that. So phase 2 is really about evaluating different options and getting the community's feedback and other stakeholders' feedback on how they would like to see Nanaimo evolve in the next few years. This will then lead us into phase 3, where we will be refining, taking all that input and looking at developing a preferred land use scenario along with policies. So I'll go over that in a bit more detail. So I'm going to skip over this slide and skip to our agenda today. So today, 3 things we're going to cover: an update on the process for phase 2, what's happening in our final engagement numbers, the anticipated plan outputs, and giving you a sneak peek for your feedback on some draft visual concepts, and then next steps, key dates, and activities. So a big part of phase 2 that's been going on over the summer and then closing through September was a foundations feedback, looking at our goals and getting feedback on that. And I actually have updated numbers from what you see here. So as of the 24th, we had 476 people complete the foundation survey. And this was a shorter survey, about 5 to 10 minutes long, on people's thoughts about the different goals that we were proposing. And then we also had the online scenario survey, and this is where I think we've been extremely successful. We've had 1,500 people complete a very detailed online survey. This is like putting them in the role of being planners, playing SimCity. This was a dedicated effort on the part of our community members who participated to take the time to go through each of the 3 scenarios, give us their perspectives. We also distributed self-guided workshops for people, or booklets for people who didn't want to use online tools. So while we gave out 118 of these detailed booklets, we only got, I think, 4 completed as of September 24th. So many people did choose to do the online version. And then I'm going to, without going through in too much detail, because we were not able to do in-person workshops like we normally would do, or open houses, what we did do was 2-hour workshops where members of the public had opportunities to participate. And why this is so significant is in the past, we would have done open houses and other things where people might have chatted with us for 10 to 15 minutes, put a few stickies up. And instead, we had members of our community giving up 2 hours of their time, sometimes 7 till 9 at night, Saturdays, to spend 2 hours with us, giving detailed feedback, listening to each other. And the quality and richness of that feedback is quite impressive. And the knowledge of our community members, some of them who've lived here all their life, others who've moved here in the last few months, has been really quite, for me, quite impressive, the level of knowledge and interest people have in their community and the time they're willing to give. So I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but one thing I would like to highlight, you'll remember that in phase 1, we did a statistically valid survey, and the results of that actually nicely mirrored our wider survey. With the scenario workshops, because of the nature of how they're done, it was not conducive to doing statistically valid. So what we did was called a representative focus group, where we had an independent consulting company pick a random sample of people that would meet certain demographic qualities in Nanaimo. And so we ran 2 of those. We had, let's see, I'm just going to give you the numbers here. We had 12 participate on September 23rd and 8 on September 18th. And again, some of the interesting pieces about this is you'll remember that in phase 1, we asked people whether or not they'd ever participated in a city planning process before, and over half hadn't. Well, with this representative sample, we got about 67% who'd participated in a planning process before. I think we may have even caught a few who'd come in phase 1. Over half, about 57%, had heard about Reimagine Nanaimo, thankfully. And several, about 25% of them, and again, it's not statistically valid, but it gives you a sense, had already participated in Reimagine Nanaimo. So a very high level of awareness, even amongst this random sample group. And again, I participated in one of these and was really impressed at the level of knowledge and interest people had in their community, the depth of feedback they were giving us. Youth, we know, is very important to council. We've had some impressive participation from different youth groups, whether it's our Quest leadership group representing students from all across the Nanaimo secondary schools, NDSS in Wellington, And then the other piece that's important in terms of the integration of this project is, again, I stand before you, but I represent several departments in this project. And the important piece was engaging staff on their perspectives in these scenarios and getting their technical input on that. You've also had an update on this and given us some guidance. We had 42 students at BIU participate through the planning program, and they were very enthusiastic about this and really engaged in their community, as perhaps we would expect. We also had a workshop with NALT, and then we've also engaged with the development community, including two major developers for applications that are en route, to get, again, their perspectives and balance them along with everything else that we're hearing. The other ones that are coming up that I should mention is we've also done workshops including Vancouver Island University, the hospital, and other major employers in our town. So in terms of community outreach, as you can see, there's been a very impressive level of outreach. One of the things I'd like to highlight is a lovely picture at the bottom left-hand corner, which is Vancouver Island Symphony, who wore Reimagined t-shirts when they were doing their performances. And then, of course, our Parks, Recreation, and Culture staff, at every opportunity when they were out, were ambassadors for Reimagine, promoting our online survey. And then, of course, we have these wonderful 600-plus students who gave us their own version of what they saw for the future of Nanaimo. And that's the windows that you see at Beban and also at Community Hall at our SART building. So, as well, and I think a big boost to us is Nanaimo was put on the map through Funkometry, through the TikTok video. And all of these things, you know, some people might say, well, these are just kind of token gestures and fun, but they led to more engaged people, people willing to take the time to give feedback and be aware. And the COVID clinic, we must thank VHA because, of course, as people went through the clinic at Beban, thousands of people saw the Reimagine logos, information, had an opportunity to participate if they wanted to. And also a nodded thank you to Tourism Nanaimo, who also promoted for us. So this is the meat of where we're getting to.
Sorry to interrupt you. Councillor Thorpe has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for interrupting Ms. Bhopal Singh, but before you move on, I just wanted to first of all, thank you for the tremendous amount of work that you and the team have done with community outreach in this and the various workshops, but I wanted to zero in on a couple of slides back, and you don't need to find it again, but your workshops for youth. And I thought the numbers that turned out there were impressive, better than the workshops for the general public. And especially the idea of engaging our leaders in training students who are already enthused about their community, they're volunteering in the community, and to get their input, I think, is a wonderful idea. So congratulations on that. Thank you. Thank you.
And through the chair, I'll accept that on behalf of our team, because the Parks, Recreation, and Culture run that very successful program, and it's, as Councillor Thorpe mentioned, for every youth that we reach their families, and we reach them, and they see themselves shaping Nanaimo's future. So that's, as a former school teacher, that's I'm very supportive of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the meat of where we're going, you've seen this graphic before. The whole purpose of Reimagine is integrating several plans, our OCP, Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan, Climate Action, Active Transportation, into one integrated document. And then sitting below it, key strategy documents, some of which you've already endorsed, like the Economic Development Strategy, and then the idea of having action plans to really implement. And our hope is to give Council action plans that help them make decisions as you review your budgets and other strategic documents in a timely fashion, and allow us to have more flexibility for Council in shaping the implementation of that higher level policy document you see in the blue. So what goes where? So we have our framework and goals and what we're calling the foundations of our planning process, and then that coordination, and I'm going to show you some examples of how we're thinking we could frame up this document, because as our steering committee, we want to make sure we're on the right track before we go too far in certain directions. And then the key piece is the future structure of the city, which is our land use plan. And as I mentioned, the action plans that we hope to do in such a way that they help Council make decisions around annual budgets and strategic planning. So this is a sneak peek and of how we could present our city plan in a very visual way, making it accessible to the community, to developers who want to work with us, and also our city staff. So I'm going to run through how the idea of this looks visually. So we have our 5 goals. At the bottom, we have a green resilient Nanaimo. I'm working backwards and up. A connected Nanaimo related to our equitable access and mobility. An empowered Nanaimo, looking at our diversity, culture, reconciliation, and social integrity. An enabled Nanaimo, which is our economic prosperity and resilience. And at the very top, a healthy Nanaimo, community well-being, livability. And what I want to show you here is one idea of a visual way of presenting this information to help the community, ourselves, and staff look at how these different policies translate into land use planning on the ground. And we'd really appreciate your feedback on this visual way of presenting information. So here's an example of a document called Town Centers. This is one of the land uses that we've been putting forward in our scenarios. Right now, in our official community plan, they're called urban nodes. We felt that urban nodes wasn't a general kind of lingo that the average person uses. Town center is a bit more accessible. And so this document shows visual examples of what that looks like, because the average citizen, and even some of our staff, having that visual helps us understand and translate what we're hoping to achieve in a vision. So what you can see here is a visual representation of what we want to see in town centers. So you'll see a mix of things that look like programming in parks, rec, and culture, active transportation, parks, environmental features, different density of housing. So this is one thing that we're hoping to take forward in the draft, and want to see if you're on board with this type of approach. So here's another example of the structures and how we would visualize this in a document to communicate to our community. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this layering document. And so what we've got here is our consultants, Lanark, have come up with a way of translating our goal to have a green Nanaimo, showing the layers, the connectivity between green areas, green infrastructure, our existing park fabric, and how that would fit in a town center. And then layering that with the built environment, so things like how different densities of housing, different mixes, vibrant uses, whether it's shops, recreational, other pieces, looking at different heights that transition from town centers to the edges of neighborhoods and other land uses. And then layering this again with, here's the economic piece, the retail piece, where we would have employment. And these are just examples to show the community what they've told us and how that translated into land use vision. And our aim is to give a document that is really accessible to the community as well as developers in terms of what we're trying to achieve. The empowered Nanaimo, so this is again with our recreational facilities, our parks, recreational culture, wellness hubs, cultural hubs. This is areas where we might look for integration with schools and others to integrate sites. And also from the culture perspective, areas where we can celebrate in our community, both in our parks and in facilities. And then in the connected, again, layering it on. So really trying to show visually how we translate things instead of a list of policies, which we will have as well, visually communicating this. So I'm going to pause there and see what your thoughts are on this type of approach.
Council? Mayor Krog?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I just want to offer particular thanks to Ms. Bhopal Singh, who's had a much longer day, I think, than most of us, getting things organized and out in the cold and the dark this morning at Sinamic First Nation in order to ensure the pole brushing ceremony went well. So a very sincere thank you to her for that. In terms of the visioning around what the town center looks like, can you comment whether we're getting, in light of the acquisition of the old Gene Burns site, have you seen a significant shift or increase in the number of comments about what the people think about downtown and what they're hoping to see? And is there any commonality, or are we just a range of options?
Okay, through the chair to Mayor Krogh. So while I haven't seen all the feedback that came in, I think Saturday was the last one of the feedback forums. What I can speak to is what we've been hearing all along during phase 1 and phase 2. And in phase 2 in particular, one of the things that I heard, and we've got to summarize everything and understand I wasn't at every single of the workshops. One of the things that I heard was a strong desire, and this was reflected in phase 1, to see more investment in downtown. People who were either from other areas or had visited other areas, noting that town centers they'd visited, they wanted to see a more vibrant downtown. This was coming from people who didn't even live downtown Nanaimo. Some of them lived in other areas. And that connection to the waterfront, very, very important, and access to the waterfront as part of that. And so from what I'm seeing, we do have to get those survey feedbacks to you. So my caveat is we haven't pulled all those 1,500 responses together, is that what I have seen so far is a lot of support for improving the downtown. So while people may not have been specific to that site, the Gene Burns building, there's a desire to see downtown thriving, a destination place for people who don't live there to visit and to enjoy retail, recreational amenities, connect to the waterfront. So that's been my experience. And once we come back and pull together our whole team's feedback that we've received, and we hope to do that towards the end of October. Once you see that phase 2 feedback, I'm hopeful that that's reflective of the times that I've been engaged during phase 2. So that's my answer on that one. And I think that perhaps the interesting thing about having the online survey is that it just allows for a breadth of feedback, and same with the workshops, broader than perhaps we would get. I'll be honest, broader than you get at an open house, because an open house, in a traditional way of doing an official community plan, you might have 2 or 3 open houses. We have provided way more opportunity than that, and way more in-depth feedback opportunity online. I doubt we would have gotten 1,500 people spending 20 minutes to an hour giving detailed feedback, or a couple hundred people spending 2 hours in a workshop to give detailed, in-depth feedback. So I'm hoping that we'll have some really rich feedback, and that the answer to that question, without my take on it, is given by Lanark. So stay posted, but end of October. And I'm hopeful that that reflects my summary of what I've seen.
Thank you, Ms. Bopal-Singh. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions. Thanks for all the work. With the action plans, I saw that the one pie was the strategies. So that would be like the climate action strategy. Would that also fit the parks and recreation? Oh no, okay. The plans are up top. So the key strategy documents, those could be existing, or like the economic development. The action implementation plans, are those something that will be done concurrently, like through as outcomes of the phase 3 process presented to council, or what? Just some more detail on those?
Yeah, absolutely. Through to Chair, to Councillor Gesselbrock, what we're hoping to do, we'll have some for you. So for example, our existing Parks, Recreation and Culture Master Plan is a document that contains many strategic policies and very specific actions. So that's one example where we hope to have for council both of those ready to look at as part of phase 3. That's a really important piece, because we're taking that huge document and integrating it into city plan. And so for those who are interested in recreation and culture and parks, they need to see that those actions don't get lost as a result of that being integrated. There will be some pieces that we may not get to and that are done as subsequent implementation pieces. So, and then specific perhaps to your interest area, things like adaptive planning related to climate change. We hope to have those action plans ready for you. And the idea with the action implementation plans is that these are things that can be revisited more frequently than an overall big city plan. And so it allows us to be more responsive to changes in opportunities, changes in conditions, at least that is our hope and intent. And the other thing we hope to do is come back to you at another GPC, which will be really a working GPC, much like this, where we're asking you questions and show you a framework and an example of what an action plan will look like and contain. I hope through the chair that answers your question.
Great, and just to follow up on that, I know last time we had an update on this, they're going through some potential other DPAs that would be looked at. Is that process of reviewing and developing the DPAs happening like during phase 3 and presented sort of at the culmination of this process? So just curious a little bit on that process.
Okay, through the chair to Councillor Gaspard, yes, we are trying very much to update a few of the development permit areas that we know need updating. And I think we mentioned at our last GPC that there are some new ones related to different hazards that we want to introduce. And so we're doing this work concurrently and hoping to have that tied in. I think through Councillor Brown, one of his last questions was how we would structure that, and we're looking at pulling out the development permit area specifics into the zoning bylaw, but keeping part of it in the integrated plan. So our intent is very much to do that. It's just we are playing with a pretty tight timeline, but our aim is to give you that full package because we can't leave some development permit areas floating in space, so to speak. And we hope to have the new ones drafted and integrated as part of phase 3. So we are on a pretty tight timeline, but that's our intent.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Just so the development permit areas may or may not be fully formulated, just depending what our capacity is to do that, but they will be starting to be developed sort of like in that phase 3 time.
Through the chair to Councillor Gaspard, there are some development permit areas that will stay the same.
Yeah.
Carry forward because they're working well. There's no need to change them other than some tweaks. So those will carry forward. The question will be some of the newer ones, can we land them concurrently? And so I just, till we get some of that feedback, I'll have a better sense of that by mid-October and give you another update. I'll make sure that we put that on our agenda.
Great. I just got one more. When we were talking about the DPAs last chance, I didn't get to inquire, but I know we did a motion to look at and do a review of the watercourse DPA, and is that something that's still kind of in motion? Okay.
Through the chair to Councillor Gaspard, yes.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. And before you go on, Ms. Bhopal-Singh, I will just offer that the visuals look good to me. I imagine at some point they'll be layered so you can see the whole thing. I do have a question for you. The slide you were just on, so the circle. My understanding of the donut economic model is that all of the plans are going to speak to each other and kind of focus on that the floor of the social needs and also the ceiling of the ecological limits. So do you imagine, for example, the Climate Action Plan is going to say potentially we need to reduce our GHG emissions by this amount, and if fully realized, the Active Transportation Plan will do this, and if fully realized, maybe the affordable housing strategy will contribute in this ways, in this way, but we'll have to watch our GHG emissions in that. Do you anticipate that kind of complexity will come out of this process? I didn't plant that.
Yes, absolutely. That is the idea of the blue section that you see of that integration, is so that we make it easier to get to the actions that we're hoping to by integrating those plans. Instead of staff, the developers, and the wider community having to work across 3 or 4 plans and coordinate, is that we have in one document climate action that relates to parks, recreation, culture, active transportation, housing, and all of those elements. So that is very much our intent. So it will be through you and your guidance as you review what we come up with to see whether we land that. But that is definitely the intent, and that is the purpose of that integration, is to get us more efficiently and effectively to our actions. Because when we have things split out, which is quite normal, that most local governments have these separate plans, is that you can have one department going, okay, we're going to take this action, another department doing another, and their timing sequencing might not be quite the same. And the idea is that by having one song sheet, the orchestra elements all work together, and maybe it will be engineering leading one project, but the outcomes will be related to active transportation, parks, recreation, and culture, and other elements of social well-being. And then another one, it might be led by parks, recreation, and culture, and then engineering play a role, but that we're syncing and sequencing things all together to achieve those outcomes. And council, one of the key things you told us was to have indicators and targets. And in order for us to do that effectively and efficiently, that's our aim. So it's all of our responsibilities across all departments. And by doing it this way, our hope is that what it does is I'm not going to say force, because we're working together, I think, incredibly well to even deliver what we're doing so far, but it keeps us continually working together interdepartmentally.
Great. Thank you. And there's no more questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to scoot through to the next slide.
Oh, my apologies. Councillor Gesselbrock has another question.
Sorry, I just with the I just had a complete mind blank. I'll ask it. I didn't realize there was more on here, so I'll
okay, we'll save that one
again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so next steps. So as you know, our public engagement closed on September 23rd. I will add a caveat that we still have a few workshops we're doing with stakeholders during October. So for those who are still waiting for their workshops, do not worry, they're still on schedule. We're expecting our analysis and input and summary back to you by late October. And our intention will be to present that back at a GPC to you. And then what we've been doing over the summer, while this engagement's been going on, there's been some heavy lifting behind the scenes. Staff across all departments have been working to take policies across various different documents, look at the overlaps, look at the gaps, draft new policies, and start framing out what we think we need, where we think we need to go. And as we take that phase 2 feedback, rolling that in, and starting to draft components of the plan. We gave you an overview of the table of contents, but starting to populate and fill that out. And one of the things we'll be working with you through is some key policies where we need direction, where we either have things missing or it's a departure from what we did before, but the feedback we're getting is suggesting that we need to adapt and change. The other key thing is coming back with a recommended land use scenario. As you know, we have the 3 scenarios. One was the current path. If we continued on our current path, the current OCP, we know we'll proceed and progress in some areas of the goals and objectives that we've had feedback from you on. But then we have 2 other paths. One was called mobility and centralized that could get us faster towards those targets and indicators that we have. We haven't set all the targets, but take us closer towards our goals. One thing I will say is that, again, with the caveat that we haven't summarized all the feedback, definitely from members of the public, there was a leaning for some of a hybrid between 2 and 3. So and one of the things we've always said is that it's no one land use scenario. There's elements of one that might work better for some and elements of another. And our job is to present to you the trade-offs. What are the implications of advancing, perhaps from a transportation perspective, a certain type of land use? What are the costs, the benefits from a whole range of factors, not just financial, but a whole range of other pieces, from social well-being to green and economic. And then the other piece is drafting the action plans, as Councillor Gesselbrock was asking about, and also honoring those that you've recently endorsed and tying those in and showing how they link. So our aim is to have engagement on phase 3, which would be a hybrid land use scenario that we put together based on the feedback we've gotten in winter of 2021-2022. And I hope once we have the engagement summarized, we'll have a better sense in the next 2 weeks as we work with our consultants on timelines relating to that. So with that, I will pause and see if you have any more questions.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Such a fleeting mind. I do remember. My question was, the feedback hasn't been collated yet from that. I was just curious, was there any, from what you saw so far, feedback or impressions about the foundations section that was sent out? I had some positive comments from folks that I spoke to about the videos that were put out, and that things were very clearly explained in that, and excited to hear about that. I was just curious if so far.
So again, with the caveat that we haven't pulled together since the 23rd and 24th when the survey closed, my sense is that most people, it made sense to them. What we were proposing makes sense. There might be a few people who want to jump straight to actions and are not seeing clearly how those goals fit to actions. And our hope is that as we get into those details, they can see where their different desires fit. And part of that is that education piece around this integrated city plan being a strategic policy level document that guides specific actions that council reviews and guides us on an annual basis. But the idea is that the plan lasts us 25 plus years. So overall, that's what I'm seeing, but my caveat is wait till you get the actual results collated by our consultants. And the other thing is, at one point, staff were a bit concerned that we had over 1,500 people give feedback on a really in-depth survey, and only just under 500, which is still good, on the foundations, which is 5 to 10 minutes. And I said, don't worry, because people have had so much opportunity to give us feedback on those goals and directions. The fact that they want to spend more of their time giving in-depth feedback on land use and what actually, where the rubber hits the road for the next 25, 50, even setting the framework for 100 years, that you should feel really good about, because it's no small feat to give that amount of time. And so I'll just add that it's almost an endorsement that we've had more feedback on the real meat of this process. We're really asking people to really put their heads in the minds of planners and decision makers like yourselves around the trade-offs and the pros and cons.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with comments, questions, feedback? Thank you, Ms. Bopulsing. I think you were very thorough.
Thank you.
So we have nothing under environmental responsibility, economic health, or community wellness livability. I don't see anyone here for question period, so I would look for a motion to adjourn. Mayor Krogh and Councillor Martman, all those in favor? Thank you, everyone.